In this article, we will try to delve into the details of the case that drastically changed the life of Tracey Roberts. In 1998, Tracey and Michael Roberts moved from Chicago to the small town of Early, Iowa. Tracey was a Native American, while Michael was originally from Australia. They gave the impression of a typical young family and seemed like decent people to all the town's residents. For both of them, it was their second marriage. Tracey had a son from her previous husband. Michael was a true computer genius and ran an IT business from home. He had many ideas that he intended to implement. Tracey, on the other hand, was simply a cheerful and sociable woman. She was a housewife, exercised regularly, and always looked great. The couple met online and a passionate romance blossomed between them. Just 18 days after their first in-person meeting, they got married. Later in their marriage, they had 2 children. A son and a daughter. From the outside, their family seemed very happy. Many were impressed by Michael's ambition, particularly their neighbor, a realtor, with whom they made several profitable deals. Her name was Mona and she was ready to do anything to continue working with Michael. It seemed to be mutual. Mona once shared that her 20-year-old son Dustin was very withdrawn and could not find a job. He went from one place to another but never stayed anywhere for long. That's when Michael offered to take the young man under his wing and see what he was capable of. The offer seemed interesting, so the realtor agreed. Michael began teaching Dustin the intricacies of his business, took him on trips and to church, and looked after the young man in every way. Overall, Michael was considered a kind, pleasant, and caring person. His wife was also perceived by everyone as a sweet and sociable individual. The couple was raising 3 children. Tracey took care of the house and kids while her husband worked. He was often away from home on business trips. Of course, no one could have imagined that something like this could happen to this family. The incident occurred on the evening of December 13, 2001 in Early, in one of the local homes. 35-year-old Tracey Roberts was with her children, preparing dinner. Food was heating up in the kitchen, while she was upstairs filling the bathtub for her 1-year-old daughter. At that time, her 2 older sons, a 3-year-old and an 11-year-old, were watching TV in the bedroom of the older boy named Bert. Suddenly, the children heard their mother's panicked scream. It was filled with despair and horror. The older Bert rushed to see what had happened. He saw Tracey trying to run into his room, but someone grabbed her by the hair and literally pulled her back into the hallway. The woman had her little daughter in her arms, whom she managed to hand over to her son at the last moment when the struggle with the attacker began. Tracey slammed the door behind her, from behind which the sounds of scuffling and a loud altercation could be heard. Then the boy heard his mother's wheezing and pleas for help. He was scared to death and didn't know what to do. Then, for a moment there was silence, followed by gunshots. His mother managed to survive the attack. She was able to fight off the attackers. One of them was killed, the other fled. The 11-year-old boy called 911 around 7 p.m. He reported that some men had broken into their house and attacked his mother. Law enforcement immediately realized it was not a joke and rushed to the address provided. At that point, absolutely nothing was known about the condition of Tracey and her 3 children. They covered the 30 kilometers to the victim's house in a matter of minutes. The medics found the crying children and their mother, crazed with fear, near the house. Tracey kept shouting that the criminal was upstairs and pointed to the stairs. But according to protocol, the medics could not enter the house until the police examined it and gave the all-clear that it was safe inside. They started providing assistance to the woman. Later, police officers arrived. They went upstairs and found a young man lying in a pool of blood. He was dead. There was no one else in the house. Tracey was conscious but breathing very heavily. So the medics immediately put her in the car and took her to the nearest medical center. It all looked like a sudden violent crime, but there were even more difficulties ahead. All the family members were devastated by what had happened. A huge number of questions arose that no one could answer. The police took over the investigation to unravel this complex tangle. The event shocked the small town of Early, where it all took place. It was a very quiet and peaceful town where nothing like this had ever happened before. Only 500 people lived here and everyone knew each other. The police officers questioned the victim's older son. The 11-year-old boy said that he saw someone attack his mother and not let her into the nursery, pulling her back by the hair. The son, who initially fell into a stupor, realized that he had to fight back if his mother could not cope, to protect himself and the other children. The boy grabbed a baseball bat, ready to attack anyone who burst into the room. When the noise died down, all he heard was his mother's heavy breathing and moaning. Soon the child heard the voices of two men outside. They started banging on the door, then the frightened son screamed at the top of his lungs. He shouted all the swear words he knew to scare off the attackers. Stomping and men's shouts about a gun were heard from behind the door. Then more than a dozen shots rang out, after which the mother opened the door. He almost hit her with the bat when he swung to strike whoever entered. The boy was glad that this whole nightmare was over and called 911. Upon learning of the incident, Mona, a family friend, rushed to the scene. She was looking for her 20-year-old son Dustin, who was friends with the family, and his car was parked in the driveway. But by the time the woman arrived, the entire area, along with her son's car, was already cordoned off. She was not allowed inside the Roberts house. Mona asked the law enforcement officers present where her son was. In response, she heard that he had died. The young man, whose mentor was the head of the household, was lying in a pool of blood near the bedroom on the second floor. Tracy shot him dead. It happened during a struggle because of the young man's attack. The police did not provide Mona with any details, did not let her say goodbye to her son, and did not go into the specifics of what exactly happened there. The woman was left completely in the dark. At this time, 20 kilometers from the house, Tracy finally regained consciousness in the hospital and was able to breathe normally. There were marks on her neck that resembled strangulation. The victim of the attack told the police about the events of that evening. According to the mother of three, she was filling the bathtub on the second floor when she heard a noise on the first. Thinking it was her husband returning from a business trip early, the woman went to check. But instead she saw two strangers who were already climbing the stairs. Tracy ran with the girl to the room of her older son and handed the child to him. She also tried to run inside and close the door, but they grabbed her by the hair and pulled her back into the hallway. Then one of the attackers grabbed her tights and began to strangle her. During this, Tracy lost consciousness and the attackers were briefly distracted. When she came to, she heard screaming and banging on the door. The woman realized this was a chance to act. She jumped up and ran to the gun safe that stood by the bed in the master bedroom. The thugs caught up with her, but miraculously Tracy managed to enter the code and snatch the gun. She pointed the barrel at the attackers and pulled the trigger. But nothing happened because the weapon was on safety. However, this threw the attackers off for a second, which was enough for the gun to fire after the next pull. At that moment, the woman was stunned by the loud sound of the shot, but she continued shooting towards the attackers until the entire room was filled with smoke. Tracy did not see the criminals, but heard the footsteps of a person fleeing the house. One perpetrator fell, the other fled. The woman heard her frightened children calling her name and headed for her son's room. Opening the door, she narrowly avoided getting hit on the head with a baseball bat by the boy. He was trying to defend himself. But the main thing was that the children were all right. By then, the smoke in the master bedroom had cleared and Tracy saw 20-year-old Dustin still alive on the floor. According to her, the young man began to get up. At that moment, Tracy grabbed the gun again and ordered him to stay put. She was in a state of shock and just wanted it all to end. The woman shouted for him not to move, but Dustin, the son of her friend Mona, did not obey. He began to get up and walk in her direction. Fearing for herself and her children, Tracy fired a few more shots. After them, Dustin fell again, this time dead. There were no traces of the second attacker anymore. Tracy said that earlier that day, Dustin had already come to their house. Learning that her husband was away, he stood on the porch for a long time and did not want to leave. He behaved very strangely, and Tracy literally had to shut the door in his face. The victim described the second participant in the attack as a tall man with dark hair, about 30 years old. But she could not make out his face. That night, Michael, Tracy's husband, was on a business trip in Minneapolis. It was completely unclear why the young man he had taken under his wing, together with an accomplice, attacked his family. The second criminal was still at large and could well return to this house. Therefore, Tracy was terrified. She was afraid to enter the house and be alone. She could not sleep, thinking only about the safety of her family. But the second perpetrator could not be caught for a long time. The only thing the police could rely on was the vague description provided by the victim of the attack. The cops began to study Dustin's circle of friends to understand who he could have gone with to the Roberts house. After this, many considered Tracy a real heroine. Tracy's story almost became a source of national pride. The woman gave several interviews to journalists. In front of the cameras, she and her husband Michael held hands. Tracy calmly said, "I did what I had to do to protect my family." The whole hall applauded. Many people considered her act a justifiable homicide. Tracy was brave and managed to protect not only herself, but also her children. She was compared to a mother bear. But the police were not used to taking anything at face value. So they began to analyze everything that happened. This story did not seem entirely convincing to them. And the deeper the cops delved into the details of the case, the more dubious the woman who killed the attacker seemed in their eyes. Despite all the support from all sides that Tracy received from the very beginning, there were people for whom those events became a tragedy. The mother of the shot young man was going through perhaps the worst moments of her life. It all broke her heart. None of the circumstances of the murder described by the victim made any sense to her. The woman had nightmares about the attack in which her son died. At the same time, Mona, the mother of the killed boy, gave interviews to the media. She was shocked by what had happened. Dustin was not a bad guy, on the contrary, a good boy. He never showed aggression towards others, had no criminal past. There were no prerequisites for him to attack the Roberts. However, the young man had problems with socialization. He even went to a psychologist with his mother. The boy found it difficult to make friends at school. He was often bullied by classmates, not invited to parties and celebrations. Mona took him from doctor to doctor, but they all made different diagnoses, not saying anything specific. Could this have resulted in aggression simply because the teenager could not cope and snapped? Tracy admitted to the police that she had always been afraid of Dustin. Next to him, she felt not just uncomfortable, but frankly feared for her safety. Even in the presence of her husband. Tracy carefully avoided any contact with the young man and categorically refused to leave him alone with the children. She was convinced that he could harm them. These accusations stunned Mona. It never occurred to her that her friend had such problems with her son. It seemed to Mona that everything was just the opposite. The police, having examined the crime scene, concluded that Dustin had no motives for such a brutal attack. unless it was planned as a robbery. The Roberts home had many valuables. Therefore, Tracy suggested that the young criminals wanted to profit, to steal money or, for example, Michael's rare gun collection. However, the actions of the criminals did not at all resemble an attempt at robbery. They did not even take the money and jewelry that was in plain sight. They did not try to rip the jewelry off Tracy when she fainted from strangulation. Instead, they immediately attacked the woman, as if their goal was violence itself. At the same time, they did not try to rape her. Could the motive for the attack be a crime of a sexual nature? Or was it an old grudge? Or just a causeless outburst of aggression? None of this made any sense to the relatives and loved ones of the shot young man. Despite all his problems, he did not at all resemble a person capable of such a brutal crime. Quite quickly, the police seemed to have grasped the solution regarding the possible motive for this attack. According to Tracy and her husband, she had recently been the victim of an attempt on her life. Shortly before the invasion of the family's home, the woman was sexually assaulted in a dentist's office while under anesthesia. She woke up during the process. The doctor tried to convince her to keep quiet and not tell anyone about the incident. In return, he promised to go to a medical center to solve his sexual problems. And also to pay the victim $150,000 in compensation. Tracy told her husband about this. He insisted on going to the police. And literally 2 days after the attempt to strangle the mother and children, she was to appear in court against her dentist. The woman was going to accuse him of rape. Presumably, he was the second person who burst into her house. Perhaps he wanted to get rid of the victim of his harassment so that she could not testify against him. However, as investigators found out, the dentist was in no way connected with Dustin. Moreover, he had a reliable alibi, the man was at work. After that, Tracy remembered another person who might well wish her dead. He fit the role of the main suspect in the crime much better than the dentist. This person turned out to be John Pittman, Tracy's first husband. They met at Northwestern University in Chicago, where they both studied medicine. John was a fourth-year student and was doing an internship at Chicago Clinical Hospital. 19-year-old Tracy was a freshman studying radiology. He had a domineering and aggressive character. But Tracy, whose childhood was spent under the oppression of a despotic father, was used to such treatment and considered it the norm. The girl married John. Later, the couple moved to Denver, Colorado. There they had a son. When her first husband tried to totally control every aspect of life, Tracy took it for granted. But over time, the marriage began to fall apart. Tracy said that John often humiliated her, especially in the intimate sphere. Eventually, she got tired of enduring physical abuse. The couple divorced in 1992. After that, the issue of custody of their 3-year-old son Bert arose. However, the boy confessed to his mother that his father had molested him. This led to a fierce court battle for custody. Tracy had no evidence of John's harassment of their son. But she tried to convince everyone present at the hearings of this. During that period, the son lived with his mother. The custody trial clearly dragged on and lasted until the moment of the attack. Thus, John Pittman could well be an accomplice in the crime or the one who ordered it, having hired 2 killers. Even little Bert suggested that his father might be involved in this attack. The police contacted their colleagues from Virginia, where John lived. They wanted to check if the man had an alibi at the time of the crime. It turned out that he had a reliable alibi. During the incident, John was at work at the clinic. He himself denied any involvement in the attack. And there was no evidence against him. At that time, Pittman was a successful plastic surgeon with an impeccable reputation. None of his acquaintances could simply believe that John had molested his son and still loved his ex-wife, whom he had long lost interest in. However, the police did not rush to cross him off the list of suspects and continued to consider this version. Months passed, and the case did not move forward an inch. Tracy was getting more and more worried. She did not feel safe while the second attacker was at large. The woman was afraid that he would return to take revenge on her. During this period, the investigators drew attention to another suspect. They became interested in Tracy's second husband, Michael. Upon closer examination, it turned out that the marriage had long exhausted itself, and there were no longer any former feelings between the spouses. Could Michael simply be trying to get rid of an unwanted wife? Many people supported this theory, and not without reason. Tracy's eldest son, Bert, told the terrible truth about his stepfather. The man was extremely strict, often cruelly punished the boy, and invented sophisticated punishments for the slightest offense. Tracy herself, for some reason, ignored such aggressive behavior of her husband and did not protect the children. Perhaps she was simply used to such treatment from childhood, and did not see anything special about it. The investigators' suspicions were supported by Michael's behavior at the hospital where he came to visit his injured relatives. This alarmed the law enforcement officers. It seemed as if the man was genuinely surprised to see them alive and unharmed. Apparently, this was not part of his plans. However, Michael had an ironclad alibi. He was on a business trip in another city, which was confirmed by surveillance camera footage. Michael was tested on a lie detector, but he failed the test, clearly hiding something. The investigators considered it quite likely that he was involved in organizing the attack. For the entire year of the investigation, the detectives were unable to prove the guilt of the criminal. However, the victim's husband behaved more than strangely. In particular, he never told his wife about his polygraph results, and did not show her any sympathy at all. This gave rise to a new wave of suspicion in Tracy, especially since she later learned about his failure on the lie detector. Tracy was completely paranoid. It seemed to her that both men had conspired against her, and they want to get rid of her in order to gain sole custody of the children. The woman shared her guesses with the sheriff, and even backed them up with the words that Michael allegedly uttered in his sleep, confessing to a conspiracy. He was afraid that their secret agreements would quickly be exposed. So Tracy was sure of the existence of a male conspiracy against her. The detectives began to study Michael's personality more carefully, and they found out that at the time of the crime, this businessman was on the verge of collapse and had considerable debts. Instead, the couple had insured their lives for $1 million. So the husband could try to get rid of Tracy for the sake of insurance payments to solve all his problems. Moreover, he was quite close with Dustin, and he could persuade the young man to help him in this matter. But these were all just assumptions. The investigation had no evidence of Michael's involvement. Meanwhile, relations between the Roberts spouses finally soured. In 2004, 3 years after the attack, their marriage broke up. Moreover, it was the husband who initiated the divorce. At that time, law enforcement officers still had no grounds to arrest the alleged organizers of the murder. After the divorce, Tracy and the children moved to Omaha. She changed not only her place of residence, but also her job and even her name. The woman was hiding from everyone, fearing a new attack. Mona, Tracy's friend and the mother of the deceased Dustin, also moved, but to another city, taking her daughters with her. Until 7 years after the attack on the Roberts house, the team of investigators in the department changed. They analyzed the case anew. And the officers also had suspicions that Tracy was not at all the heroine who saved her children, and she might turn out to be a cruel murderer. No traces of breaking in or attempted robbery were found in the house. Then how could two people break in there? 9 gunshot wounds were counted on Dustin's body. The boy was literally shot point blank, leaving no chance of survival. At the same time, there seemed to be no second attacker. The new investigators decided to talk to Tracy's first husband. And they found out that he was not at all the monster she painted him to be. The man said, it was Tracy herself who had fits of aggression. Once she even pointed a gun at him and threatened to kill him. And then she fired at the ceiling. After that, he had to call the police. However, Tracy lied to the cops that she wanted to take her own life. So she managed to avoid punishment. So it was she who turned out to be aggressive and unfaithful in marriage, not John. In addition, she constantly squandered his money. The man even hired a private detective, suspecting his wife of cheating. And he confirmed, numerous lovers visited Tracy as soon as John went to work. In the end, it was the husband who filed for divorce. Because he feared for his own life and got tired of enduring the antics of a crazy wife. John was worried about his son. After all, he was growing up in an unhealthy atmosphere, with an abnormal mother. That's why he fought so hard for custody of the boy. Which only further infuriated Tracy. Despite all of Tracy's attempts to turn her son against his father, she had no evidence of domestic violence by her first husband. The woman realized that her ex-husband now had a much better chance of getting custody of the child than she did. And perhaps this is what pushed her to commit a crime in order to frame John. The dentist who allegedly raped Tracy during an appointment had actually been suffering from her harassment for a long time. And he was ready to prove it. Surveillance cameras were installed in his office, the recordings from which confirmed the doctor's words. It turned out that Tracy, having learned about the existence of the video, withdrew her lawsuit against the dentist on the eve of the crime. And Michael, Tracy's second husband, who allegedly beat her and stalked her after the divorce, hired a private detective to check his wife's accusations. He claimed that Tracy constantly cheated on him and had a terrible character. Michael endured all this for a long time for the sake of the children, but in the end he could not stand it and filed for divorce. The man admitted that he was a strict father, but categorically denied beating his wife or children. And he insisted that it was Tracy who turned the children against him. After the divorce, Michael moved to California, where he completely devoted himself to business and was able to achieve success in it. It seemed as if the woman slandered everyone around her. She tried to portray herself as a victim of abuse by every man in her circle. Although in reality, everything was exactly the opposite. The investigators were convinced that Tracy's story about the events of December 13, 2001 was the same lie that the woman invented from beginning to end. They needed to meet with the alleged victim of the attack in person and talk to her face to face. But by that time, the mother of 3 had not just moved to another state and changed her personal data. She regularly changed her contact information about herself. While law enforcement tried to track down Tracy, they interviewed all her close friends, hoping to understand the woman's motives. One of the new suspect's girlfriends, who was pressured by the officers, gave very important testimony. She helped Tracy clean the house after the attack and saw from where she shot Dustin. The story of this woman simply could not be true. The actions she described were physically impossible to reproduce. How could an ordinary fragile woman cope so deftly with 2 grown men? It just didn't make sense. The police were forced to re-examine the entire list of material evidence from scratch. Among them was a very old computer found in the back seat of Dustin's car. In Tracy's opinion, this is the main evidence of the robbery. After all, the equipment belonged to her husband. But it is not clear why Dustin would steal it, when there were plenty of much more valuable and compact items in the house that would be much easier to carry out. For example, money or jewelry that was lying in plain sight. A pink notebook was found in the front seat of Dustin's car. In it, the young man allegedly described the plan of the crime shortly before his death. It said that his task was to kill Tracey Roberts. And the customer of the crime was, oddly enough, her first husband, John Pittman. But the police noticed one strange thing in these records. They contained too many details of the event, which the young man simply could not know before the attack. At the same time, the handwriting really belonged to Dustin. It seems that he wrote this either under dictation or at gunpoint. The mother of the deceased did not recognize this notebook. Moreover, it was pink in color and looked more like a woman's. And Dustin hated this color and would never have bought himself such a diary. And in general, the boy never kept any diaries at all. There were no more entries in the notebook except for the plan of the crime, which also seemed extremely suspicious. It was obvious that it was purchased quite recently and used only once, specifically for these notes. It became more and more obvious that the notebook could have been given to the boy by Tracy herself in order to stage a crime. According to the new version of the investigation, the shot young man was not an attacker, but became a victim of an insidious criminal. He was trusting and easily succumbed to someone else's influence, which Tracy took advantage of. By this time, the woman's whereabouts had already been established. Tracy started having problems in her new place too, in a small town in Nebraska where she had moved. The local authorities accused her of forging documents and concealing information about her own identity. This gave a reason for a search. The woman's home was carefully examined. Extremely disturbing materials were found on the computer of the mother of three. There was eccentric pornography, photos of corpses and weapons. 10 years after the murder, the police finally managed to get to the bottom of the truth. On July 20, 2011, they arrested the woman who was previously considered a heroine who protected her children. The impetus for the detectives was the memories of Tracy's friend who helped her clean the house after the attack. And also the testimony of the victim's friend about the notebook with Dustin's confession. The investigators managed to find out that all these texts were actually written by the boy under Tracy's dictation. No traces of outside intrusion were found in the house. The criminal could well have inflicted the scratches on her neck herself. This was evidenced by the fact that the injuries were minor and did not pose a threat to life. The nature of the gunshot wounds on the victim's body also did not correspond to the version of the murder described by Tracy. The episode with Dustin, who allegedly tried to get up after several bullet wounds, seemed completely absurd. With such injuries, he should have already been dead. The experts carefully studied the photos from the crime scene. And based on the blood traces, they concluded that Dustin did not get up. All the bullets hit him from top to bottom when he was lying on the floor. This also did not fit at all with Tracy's version of the attack. The woman shot the boy when he no longer posed a danger to her. However, the defense continued to insist that Tracy was saving her children. It was a touching story, designed primarily to convince the jury of the defendant's innocence. Moreover, as the lawyers claimed, most of the evidence against Tracy was circumstantial. The main trump card of the defense was to be Bert, the accused eldest son. He said that he heard male voices behind the door. And he saw someone pull his mother away from the door. According to the teenager, the attacker shouted through the door that his mother was dead, and he himself would be next. Later, the boy allegedly saw a wounded young man trying to get up, just as Tracy said about it. But the reliability of this testimony caused great doubt. After all, according to the woman's initial version, at that moment the door to the nursery was still closed. And the son simply could not see it. Therefore, the prosecutor believed that this story was suggested to Bert by his mother. The prosecution insisted that the defendant killed Dustin in order to frame her ex-husbands, put them behind bars, gain sole custody of the children and full control over their money. This was seen as the main motive for the crime. That day, Tracy called Dustin to her, threatening with a weapon. She forced him to write notes in a notebook, and then shot him. After which she staged an attack on herself, inflicting minor injuries on herself. And she left a diary and a computer in the victim's car. Even the forensic expert confirmed that with such injuries, Tracy could not lose consciousness. Which also contradicted her testimony. After a lengthy discussion of the case materials, the jury found Tracey Roberts guilty of first-degree murder. The woman was sentenced to life imprisonment without the right to parole. When the judges read out the verdict, Tracy allegedly burst into tears, but there was not a single tear in her eyes. It seemed to those present that she simply played another performance. Bert was the one who experienced this story the hardest. The boy was sure that on that cold night, his mother saved his life and the lives of other children. And now she is unfairly behind bars. He still visits Tracy in prison and supports her. A few years after the trial, Tracy's second husband, Michael, with the permission of the guardianship authorities, took the children. And together with his new wife, he returned to his homeland in Australia. Tracy still insists that she is not guilty. She is serving her sentence in the Women's Correctional Colony in the town of Mitchellville, Iowa. That's all for now. Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Give this video a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe to my channel so you don't miss any future content. Take care and goodbye.